Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here for the third time, I think. And I wish you, of course, I'll try to speak loud so that your eating will be overhowled by my voice. If I'm not much mistaken, I was speaking here last year too, and I started with the quote from Master Yoda from Star Wars. I mean, those of you who were here last year, I think, remember the name of this dinner is a very dangerous dinner. Very dangerous name. It's called Forecasting Dinner. And I started by the quote of Master Yoda, who in the second part of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, said, "Difficult to see the future is." And I think the words of my true master are being evident as we sit here today. I'm quite sure that nobody's expected the depth of the turmoil as we see it. We now live in a world where governments have become extremely loser-friendly. It is the banks that have done the most mischief in the past that get rewarded the most. They say, and it is a general wisdom, so to speak, that the crisis is a subprime American mortgage crisis. Now, this is in no way the whole truth. There is no way that such a small market could lead to a depletion of this tremendous global magnitude. In fact, I'd like to propose, ladies and gentlemen, a little bit more bolder reason for this crisis, that it is truly a crisis of our whole Western civilization, and the subprime situation was just the tip of the iceberg. So if you actually look at what happened, this whole thing got started and it kind of triggered off in this very small, tiny, negligible market of subprime in America. And the bubble then bubbled upwards, and it was not able to be held by the mortgage banks. It went further to regular banks, and regular banks could not withstand the strength of the depletion, so to speak. And it bubbled, and banks were destroyed. And it bubbled upwards towards bank insurance companies that could not stand the pressure. And as we sit here today, it is the governments, the sovereigns, that are being tested. And let's see whether governments will be able to stand the bubbling. Now, the problem, of course, is, and perhaps 20 years down the line, where our children will be thinking back to us, they might call us the debt age. Not the dead age, but the debt age, because although debt has always been a characteristic of our Western market civilization, it has become an overhauling characteristics of our governments today. It is on the level of governments that we are indebted, and last year, those of you who were here, that I showed you the graphs that the advanced economies are much more indebted than the poor economies. The household in the rich countries are indebted by more than 140% of their annual income, and of course it is almost impossible to start a venture today without debt, without external capital. This is a thing that worked very well until came the day when this was no longer sustainable. So going back to today, when I think 3 weeks ago, sovereign Polish government had to issue Eurobonds for 300 basis points over mid-swap, making the effective interest rate of the Polish government 6%. Just fancy how much would banks be willing to lend to corporations if a sovereign is willing to pay the vicinity of 6%. This crisis has been likened yesterday to an influenza by a very significant and well-known Czech economist. And the problem with influenza, or the advantage of influenza, is that you can actually survive it with regular helping. Now, one of the reasons why this crisis isn't really as deep and why we can still have a very luxurious dinner is that the governments have really effectively put all kinds of pillows beneath the free fall as they could in the fall of last year, and in fact we'll have to probably do the same exercise today. It is for the first time in our history that governments have enlarged their debts in the span of 2 weekends. Of course, you know the budget deficit of the United States is now in double digits, scoring almost the score that the Czech Republic managed to do in 2003 when we consolidated our transformation deficits together with the social deficits that we created, and it was our record level of height of the deficit. In other words, it is being helped massively by financing of the government, by indebting the government. So now the problem is bubbled to the level of governments, and we will see whether the sub-governmental structure that is only now being created in Europe and America will be able to hold the pressure. There's one good news about this crisis, and the silver lining really is that this crisis is truly global. There is no country left behind, so to speak. And so far, it has shown in effectively quite joining tendencies. Now, the real test is, will we be nice to each other? Will we lend each other money if a country finds itself in turmoil? Will other European countries be able to build liquidity shield around it? Or will we be nasty to each other, which is the other threat that might work? So if we have been tested in the last 7 years, how well we can deal with wealth, because consequently the last 7 years, roughly from the year 2000 all the way till the middle of 2008, were really good years. And if you think back to the Old Testament story of the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, then Pharaoh was really tested. It was a test of wisdom. Will you be able to not consume everything that you overproduced, but how well will you deal with your wealth? Will you be able to store it and create a storage that you can then use in the times of the 7 poor years? Now, Pharaoh in that story, which is about 4,000 years old, and it is, by the way, the first mentioning of a business cycle. It's the first ever mentioned business cycle in our civilization, and I must say that the solution to it was Keynesian. Pharaoh stood that test. Pharaoh really did have budget surpluses during the good years, and then he could use the surpluses to help and cushion the fall in the poor years. Now, we unfortunately have not built any storage houses. We've actually eaten it all. We've eaten everything that we've produced, and we can ask ourselves a good question: what good have we done in those 7 very good years? America has increased its government debt by 10% of GDP in the good years. Thus, it is no longer true that the European Union is more indebted than America. America is now the continent with higher level of GDP debt than Europe. Europe has actually, to my, and I'm quite sure to your great surprise as well, behaved better in the good years than the United States. The United States, as I said, increased its debt from around 60 or 58 to 68% of GDP.